Welcome back. I'm MCNEW. This is Duty, Grit, and Grinds. In early episode and maybe in my bio, I mentioned serving some time as a SWAT medic, and that prompted some questions. I got questions from some police type folk and some firefighter type folk. A paramedic in particular emailed me. And so in response to that, I thought I'd just film this and kind of go into how that program started, how I got into it, and, if that helps people, cool. So our program was different. We were starting something new. There are a lot of different models where SWAT teams will use police officers as medics, firefighters as medics, doctors as medics. And so the term, I'm going to use the term medic really generally just to refer to the guy who carries the medical stuff on the team. And so I'll talk a little bit about what my certifications were, but I was not a paramedic or a doctor, of course. So again, I'm going to talk about what our model was, what we created as a region, as a team back then, and I'll even talk about what it looks like now because it is different, and then why we created the model we did. So when I had been a police officer for 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 years, I signed up with the fire district where I was a police officer to be a firefighter as a volunteer. And so that district is a huge rural district where the town I worked in was where the fire station was, and it was the center, not the center geographically of the district, but it was the highest volume concentration of people was the town I worked in, and the district, very large around it, served the town and the geographic area around. As a police officer up there in that area, the district would have a paramedic staffed on a response vehicle, an ambulance staffed with 2 EMTs, and then the rest of the fire apparatus and there's a major interstate running through here and several state highways. So it's a very busy place to be a firefighter or police officer in terms of rural places. So, because there was a lot of traffic, a lot of people. And so other staff was volunteers for the other apparatus. And so if a call came in the middle of the night, pagers would go off for firefighters, volunteers at home, and they would respond in, within a couple of minutes, a minute, several minutes, they would climb into the appropriate apparatus and off they'd go. But the on-duty staff, they did have one paramedic who was in a paramedic response vehicle, like a SUV, and an ambulance, and that was staffed all the time. And so they would respond on everything. Because of that volunteer model and the limited resources they had, I, as a police officer, would respond on a lot of medical calls and fire calls. So where normal traditional police response wouldn't be required, but it's the middle of the night or it's the middle of the day, they have limited resources and I'm available. And so we'd help each other out. I would respond on medical calls. And so as a part of that, after a few years and living in that community, I volunteered as a firefighter. There was a fire academy that was, say, a couple hundred hours long. They met on nights and weekends for a couple of months. I don't really remember exactly, but it pretty well prepared you to be a volunteer firefighter. There was burning and car crash simulators and chainsaw demos, and it was pretty legit. It was put on by a different fire district, a pretty big fire district, and so it was a legit volunteer academy. And so I did that. At least in part to enhance my abilities as a police officer, the more you know. And so, but also just always looking to try new things and learn new things and have new experiences. And so after a year or so of volunteer firefighting, which, mostly was my days off, but also built some skills that I could use as a police officer, I was allowed by my police agency to go through the EMT certification course or class. So that was hosted by the same fire district that hosted the regional fire academy for all the, volunteer firefighters. They are now hosting an EMT course, which is, again, a few hundred hours, and it's a couple days a week in the morning, I think, and then a few full Saturdays to get your certification. So pretty grueling class to get your EMT-B, as a part-time gig while you're working full-time. And so, but my police agency, seeing the value of that additional training for us, they allowed me to do it on duty. And so I was able to get my EMT certification. So with my EMT certification, I had an obligation to the fire district to kind of pay it back, so to speak. So I would work a couple of shifts a month on their ambulance, say 24-hour shift here and there, maybe 2 or 3, and sometimes more, sometimes maybe less. And so I was running calls with the paramedic and another EMT, and just outside of my police work. And so I was using the skills as a police officer, of course, but I was also working these shifts on an ambulance. So that was kind of a unique experience, doing hospital transports with patients and running on calls as an EMT firefighter. So I don't think that's a unique experience. I think a lot of people volunteer and get certified as an EMT. I don't know. Certainly there's a lot of volunteer firefighters. I don't know how many also have an EMT, but so this wasn't something unique or special that I did. It was pretty common. That's how this district staffs their stuff. So I did that, and I'm working as a police officer. And at the same time, on the police side, early on in my department, we had some pretty serious turnover when I got hired. And so we were pretty fresh new folks, and we didn't have instructors in any discipline. So we didn't have a defensive tactics instructor or firearms instructor or any of that. And so we were rebuilding. And so as one of the more senior guys, barely, by months, not years, the chief or sergeant comes to me and says, we need a firearms instructor and a defensive tactics instructor, which one do you want, basically? And I hadn't shot a lot as a young person, and I was just like an average shooter in the police academy. I didn't have a lot of experience with it, but I liked the sound of it more than defensive tactics. So I said, I'll take that one. And so over the next few years, that was pretty early on, maybe within a year or two of getting hired, maybe 3 years at most, somewhere in there, I spent just weeks, 40-hour, 80-hour chunks of time outside the house training with at different police academies around the state, getting my firearms certification. So I became a firearms instructor, and with that, there's not just the mechanical operation of a firearm and how to teach someone to shoot, but also there's a certain amount of tactics that come with that. So that started to become an interest of mine, firearms and tactics. And so I get certified to teach in handgun and rifle and shotgun, and slowly that leads into it kind of matches up with a grant I was managing. Again, this was a small agency, so we all had different projects. And that grant was a Safe Schools grant, where there was money available for training a response to a critical incident at the school. And so I sought out training to bring back to the house and teach our own guys active shooter response training. And so I started getting certifications in active shooter response instructor. And so I'm traveling to north of Seattle, up to the Canadian border, to the east side, going to different schools offered by a couple of companies, but one in particular where I just got hundreds of hours of instructor certifications to respond to active shooters. And so great training. A lot of it was simunition. Some of it was live fire. And so it was very dynamic training. I also got a certification as a shotgun breacher during that same time. And so running parallel to this medical thing that was kind of just a side gig, I am ramping up what becomes like probably my biggest passion as a police officer, which is training in firearms and tactics. Active shooter in particular as well. And so that's all happening. I'm going, again, I have hundreds of hours of certifications in these active shooter response courses, and then a variety of other things as well. And so During all of that, we have a regional SWAT team. My agency did not. We were too small to contribute an officer to the team. It didn't make sense for our agency at the time, and so we, as a region, as a county, we had a team made of 3 of the largest agencies in the county. And I'm no part of that. I don't know anything about it other than it exists, and that's about it. Well, in 2012. One of the commanders from that team comes up and visits me and says, "Hey, the team needs a medic or a medic program. You have some certifications in medical training and some other training. Would you be interested in helping us start a SWAT medic program?" So of course, this is like right in line with my interests, and I'm enthusiastic about it. The commander that's approaching me about it has already got permission from my agency to approach me on it and have me participate. And so, of course, I'm like all in, and they're going to start this thing. And so, kind of what started that was for years. I want to say the team maybe had been up and running for 8 years in its current state as a regional team. And when the team first started, they had the 3 large police agencies contributing operators, but then they had a large fire district contributing paramedics, 2 or 3 or whatever it was, and they were the medics. They had medical training, and they responded with the team. The downside of that model is anytime the medic was deployed, they were unarmed. And so anytime the medic was deployed, they had to have, say, a chaperone, a SWAT operator chaperone. So anytime you were moving those personnel around the SWAT field, you were tying up an operator to guard them, to chaperone them, to provide security protection for them. And so, and if they have a couple of them, now you've got, you have these armed escorts in SWAT operators escorting these medical personnel around. And so the team commander was looking to change that model to try something different, where they had a law enforcement officer who could provide, so you're still going to work in pairs, oftentimes, all the time, but you are responsible for your own protection, your own security. You can be alone on a position, especially a containment position, and provide your own security. And so that's kind of the advantage of this model. Of course, the disadvantage is it's probably, at least around here, I don't know any paramedics that are also police officers. And so you are going to reduce your level of training. And I'll talk about that. And so I agree to start this program, at least help the team start this program. And so I'm ramping up to do that. I'm getting gear and outfitted. I took the physical test, the one that the operators take to get on the team. You're not just going to walk on. I guess that's worth mentioning. You're not just going to walk on as this new guy who's been handed this thing and now you're on the team. And so, there was a little bit of a selection process, and I'm up and running. I'm getting gear, which we're starting from the ground level, and we didn't have a model like this to copy. And so I'm getting uniforms and vests and equipment, but also medical equipment. And so doing a little bit of research, building up our medical bags, had a pretty generous budget to work with to get up and running. And so one of the things that the team commander wanted was an EMT with an IV credential. And so I didn't have that at the time. I couldn't do IVs. And so the fire district that I had gotten the certification through agreed to help me get that. And so they teach a one-on-one class with an instructor as, their gift to the regional SWAT team. And I go through an EMT course, EMT IV course. And I don't remember how long it was. If it was, 4, 5, 6 Saturdays all day long, three or four, I don't even remember. But I do remember that it was just, dozens of IVs, starting them on different volunteers at the station that I could get my hands on. And so I get this certification to add to my EMT. And the next thing I did was I sought out some specific tactical combat casualty care training. The TCCC course is what was available at the time. And the JBLM north of here was offering to law enforcement, they were offering this TCCC class. So this is this is 2012, so we're still at war in a variety of theaters. And so there were, I believe they were SF guys that were teaching this TCCC class to law enforcement officers. So I was fortunate enough to get sent to that. I go up and I get I don't remember if it was 5-6 days of training up at JBLM in their TCCC. And so really dynamic training, really hands-on simulators, blood and moulage and some, it was just a cool class. And so lots of good experience from that. And I come back with a TCCC certification on top of my EMT. Now I'm an IV technician and I'm kind of ready to roll. And so I get folded into the team and I start training with them. And my job was pretty specific. So I wasn't training on entry. I wasn't training on room clearing. I was being exposed to the training, being folded into the team so that I was familiar with the tactics so that I could move and operate with the team. But I had a very specific job, which was medic. And so I spent a lot of time, sitting in the armor when we were on a surrounding call out. I was, if we would make entry, say in a large structure, I wasn't a part of the room clearing element. I would be in like a secondary element, a layer away from where we were doing room clearing and things like that. And so, and all of that was to preserve me. I'm no good as a medic if I'm holding a rear containment or if I'm an entry man at the point position. So what just wasn't my job. My job was SWAT medic. And so time goes on. I'm getting some additional training and deploying on missions, and that was kind of how we got up and running and how kind of my career path prepared me for that to start this program. And so it worked for a while. It worked really well. It was while I was on the team as medic that I transferred to the agency I work for now. It's the largest agency in our community, in our region. And it is the largest contributor of SWAT operators to the SWAT team. And so I transferred part of that transfer, they allow me to stay on the team as the medic. And within a year of being at the new agency, I tested for an opening as operator. It's really where more of my interest was. I had the specialized medical training, but really my interest now and then was in tactical stuff, room clearing, gas munitions, just the other stuff. So I test twice. The first time I wasn't quite off probation. There's a 12-month probation. So I tested right before my probation ended. Wasn't selected. After my probation ended, a second, almost like maybe a month later, my probation had ended and another position comes open. I tested for that position and was selected and went off to SWAT Basic. And so that did leave the team now with a program up and running, needing personnel to be SWAT medics. And so the department puts it out to the agency for an internal posting, like who wants to be a SWAT medic. It's how we fill different ancillary duties and lateral assignments within the agency. It's just an internal job posting. And so one of the things we had learned is that while the EMT credential looked nice, so much of the EMT certification was irrelevant to the job of SWAT medic. Really, in its simplest form, my job as SWAT medic, what our team needed was someone who was available for patient care on a gunshot or some sort of penetrating trauma, TCCC type training for put a tourniquet on it, wrap it tight, put some pressure on it, because we were operating in areas with quick access to a hospital facility usually. So like immediate patient stabilization was our need. And so we considered there was a consideration to train EMTs, but so much of that training was medical training, and as opposed to traumatic injury training. And I won't say it's irrelevant, but it was a nice to have, not a need to have. And so they opted to go for just squared away police officers who could be trained in that very specific tactical combat casualty care, and it's called a variety of things, but that discipline. And so back then there were far fewer self-aid, buddy aid, TCCC type tactical medical courses. There are many now. There are companies who are teaching this. They're offering it regionally. So it's a lot easier to find courses now to get that kind of niche training, and then continue to do that. And so we selected a couple guys. They took my place as a team and did not get their EMT. And so over the years since then, the model has stayed the same. We've continued to have law enforcement personnel fill that role. The type of training that that person has brought to the table has changed as people have rotated through that position. Most recently, one of the other partner agencies on the regional team contributed a guy who was like a legit PJ who had real combat medical training. And he was like, probably like if you're building a dream team for a SWAT medic, like this was your guy. And he brought a lot to the table, real experience, real training. He shared the training with everyone. He had connections in that field. And so that guy really brought a lot to the table. Unfortunately, he rotated out, took a job somewhere else. And so we are back to a police officer with a niche training in whose sole job is to be integrated into the team and provide medical training or medical care, traumatic care as needed. Coordinate evacuation, coordinate with the firefighter, EMS type resources that come to a scene or stage at a scene rather. And so it's a far less level of training, but it meets our needs because we're really just looking for a dedicated person who can do self-aid, buddy aid, provide their own protection, have their head on a swivel, brings the kind of tactical training to the table that basic police officers have, so that if we're doing movements and formation outside, we're all looking for the same thing. We're all doing threat assessments and things like that, which is not inherent in firefighter training. And so that's why it works for us. It's changed over the years, and actually right now I think they are interested in perhaps bringing back on the fire district, just because it's harder to find police officers who are interested in that specific training, but or at least that specific role on the team as people roll through that role, and I think a lot of times are itching to get into the operator position like I was. And so that is our model. That is why it worked for us. It's not going to work everywhere, and it's it's going to be different in different regions, and so that's why it works for us. And that's that. So hope that helps anybody who's interested. If not, it's just a neat story. And so with that, I'm MCNEW, and this is Duty, Grit, and Grinds. Thanks for watching.